Welcome to ITE 1932 Technical Writing. This is the first lecture in series. In this lecture, we will give you an introduction to the basics of technical writing. This is the color coding that we will be using for this lecture and all the subsequent lectures. Please pause here for a bit and remember this color coding. Writing is what defines what we call history. Everything that has happened before writing was invented is called prehistory, and everything after is called history. Writing was invented around 3000 BC. As you can see, the prehistory is longer than history, even though the box is smaller. Millions of years of information are now lost because there is no writing about the prehistory. Writing was the oldest art of communication of your ideas and thoughts to future generations. Thus, the invention of writing is considered an important milestone in human history. Now for a very brief history of writing. As I was saying, writing was invented around 3000 BC. One of the oldest types of writing that has been read are Egyptian hieroglyphs. Why we know the name of Julius Caesar 2000 years after his death is because of his writing in the Cold War and other people's writing about him. Writing used to be accessible only to the learned and the rich until the invention of the Gutenberg's press. This made it more accessible to the masses. And today, we can write with our collaborators online across oceans and nations, a great leap from the days of chiseling words on rocks. Now let's see why we need technical writing. After all, that is the topic of the course. Now, technical writing is the way for you to communicate your ideas and ideas to a wider audience. Of course, you can do a lecture, you can go and talk to people, you can do a presentation like I am doing right now, but still today, writing it down is the most efficient way of communicating it to a wider audience. There are various ways of various types of technical writing. We have user manuals. As you can see, it is a user manual for NASA space shuttles. Then we have emails to coordinate with our collaborators. You may write technical reports about your research or development projects to communicate what you have done to other people. But as we were talking about research, the most efficient way of communicating research with a wider audience is research paper. So I have two examples here on how you would write a research paper, a common overview, let's say. Do not worry, we will be covering all of this in subsequent lectures. And one very important thing for any person, one important technical writing that any person would do is a curriculum with a CV or a resume. And there are many more other forms of technical writing. You need to communicate your idea clearly and precisely to the target audience, and your audience should be interested in reading what you wrote. If you fail in one of them, either the audience might not be interested, they might be apathetic, or on the other hand, the idea that you were trying to communicate might have not crossed to the minds of the listeners correctly. Therefore, it is important that you uphold both of these points. Like in all forms of communication, the first step is knowing your audience. For example, if you are writing about highly technical matters, you should make sure that if your audience is a beginner level, you need to write it in the level that the beginner can understand. Let us look at an example. The discovery of the Higgs boson particle. First of all, they have the research paper, which is targeted at the most technical audience, physicists, who would know exactly what they are talking about, and they would need figures and facts and numbers of the discovery. And then they have the newsletter of the lab for mostly science enthusiasts. Maybe they might not always be physicists, maybe some people who are interested in what they are doing, but still having an edge towards scientific knowledge or reading scientific knowledge. So while it is not as narrow in the audience as a research paper, this is still a specific piece of writing. Then we have something like Wikipedia, where it is for the less technically inclined people and almost to a general audience. But it is not everybody who can read a encyclopedia article. And then for the public audience, we have news items. You can see the difference in presentation of the same news to various types of audiences. Moving on, you need to understand the writing task and the purpose of your writing. First of all, if it is you are answering a question, you need to understand the question or the exam. Then you need to provide the best answer that you can think of. Before doing any of the writing, you need to organize your thoughts and material at hand. Maybe outline your writing documents before start writing. So you can do it on a separate piece of paper where you jot down as little notes what you plan to write, or sometimes even the flow. You can make a simple list or even make a mind map of the ideas that you want to do. Now let's look at a small example. One important thing that you have to do when you're writing is understanding the prompt. So I have given a question on this slide. Post this here and think about the answers to this question. Now, I hope that you have honestly paused the video and tried the answers. Did you get caught by point 10? If you did, that means you have not put the effort to understand the prompt before starting to answer. So it is very important, before answering a question, you need to understand the whole of the question. That is what I tried to illustrate with this interesting example. Now, on an exam, you will not have the time to revise your responses. If you realize too late that you have misunderstood the prompt, therefore, it is very important that given the question, the first thing to do, first thing to think about is that you understand what you are being asked to write. Sometimes students might answer a question that they think is a question, but ultimately realize that it is not the question that the examiner has asked for. So that is a very tragic situation, especially if you are timed for your answers. So you cannot go back and undo what you have written. Now, these are some points that we have taken from Purdue. the first step of understanding the prompt is reading the prompt carefully. So this is not the time to skim read. This is not the time to jump over words. It is important that you read slowly and carefully to make sure that you understand exactly what is being asked of you. So read this prompt very carefully with me and see how we can proceed with the following question. Define artificial general intelligence and discuss AI completeness in parallel to NP completeness in algorithms. Define artificial general intelligence and discuss AI completeness in parallel to NP completeness in algorithms. The next step is to underline keywords. Underline what is most important. The prompt will contain keywords that will reveal the prompt's topic. Most of the time, they would be in the form of nouns and verbs. So here, let's underline these action verbs. Define, discuss. So these are the things that you need to do for this question. And what are the items that you need to do these actions on? It's the next question. So we underline the nouns: artificial general intelligence, AI completeness, NP completeness, algorithms. So now that you have your verbs and nouns in place, you can move on to step 3. Step 3 is to restate the prompt in your own words. It is said that the best way to learn is to teach, which I hope is true, as teaching is what I do for a career. Now, that saying exists because when you are teaching, you are trying to restate what you know, what you may have learned by book learning, by rote learning, to another person so that that person would understand. So here what you are doing is you are trying to do it for yourself. You read, you understand, and then you try to write the question in your own words. So with our example, I have written down it as a number of points. First, I need to say what the general intelligence is, and then what is AI completeness, what is NP completeness, and then explain the similarities and differences between those two concepts. If I follow these points, I will be giving a good answer for this question. Now, pause this video and go through the following slides slowly, one by one, while answering the quiz 1 uploaded in the Moodle. The first point that we will cover is avoiding jargon. What is jargon? Jargon are the words that you have in a certain topic which might not exist or might have different meanings in the general one. Now let's say if you say a word charge. So charged in general sense would mean something like charging a battery, or an energetic performance. You can say somebody has given a charged performance as that character. But if you look at something like the legal document, the word charged means prosecuted. Somebody has sued that person. So jargon are words that are specific to the domain or the subject that you are speaking. So using jargon would be okay if you are only talking with people who are your peers, who are in your own circle of influence or your domain. But when you are communicating outside, you should always avoid jargon. Audience familiarity with the topic determines the appropriate use of jargon, as I mentioned earlier. So this is an example of a jargon-driven sentence. Most bookings are to date exhibit a lack of reliability when subject to the impeachment of interim, so on and so forth. As you can see, articulate, propellant, extended firing durations, all of this. A general audience would start to fall asleep or lose interest when it's a string of words that they have never heard before. So if you want to give the same idea out, you use jargon-free. So you can say something like, the exhaust gas eventually damages the coating of most existing ceramics. Simple and to the point, and without jargon. But sometimes these technical words are integral to the thing that you are going to say. If the thing that you are describing in your technical report is a jargon word by itself, there is no way around it. You cannot call it by a different name. So there are some times that you would need to define things in your document. So if it is an unfamiliar term, you do need to define it in your writing. So here is an example. You can say DNS is a hierarchical distributed naming system for computers and so on and so forth. But unless the reader already knows what DNS is, that person is in trouble. So you should write it this way. The domain name system, in brackets or in parentheses, DNS is a hierarchical distribution system, naming system, and so on and so forth. So you need to do this on the first instance that you would otherwise use this acronym or abbreviation, depending on what you are doing. It can be an acronym or an abbreviation. Either way, you do need to give the full form and define it in the beginning. In the subsequent uses, you can use the shortened form without a problem. Now, one more reason why you would need to define these shortened forms and unfamiliar terms is that by the virtue of it being short, sometimes they overlap. The same shortened form might explain two different things. A good example is natural language processing, subject that I usually do. It is natural language processing, NLP. So if you come to me and talk to me about NLP, I would automatically think that you are thinking about natural language processing. But there is another NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So this has actually happened to me. I have told people that I am working in NLP, and people have assumed I am working in neuro-linguistic programming. So that kind of problems or mix-up happened because I did not define the unfamiliar term in the beginning of our conversation, which is not a requirement for normal one-on-one communication, but it is definitely a requirement on your formal writing, because one-on-one communication, the other person can ask you, what do you mean? What is NLP? Is it neuro-linguistic programming? But when you write something and pass it on, you are not there to correct the person. Therefore, what you write should be clear. The next point is that you had to write the most important point first. You had to put the key information in the main clause. We do understand that grammatically you can put the information at the beginning or the end, or you can write a complex sentence where it is in the middle or the end, and so on and so forth. However, in technical writing, we expect that the key information would be in the main clause and it would be in the first position. So instead of saying something like, despite making several errors in the first half, Dutch 14 team won the game, you would say, Dutch 14 team won the game despite making several errors in the first half. Because the important information in this sentence is that Dutch 14 team won the game. The next point is to use correct amount of information. Social networks are becoming so popular these days. Enormous number of active users. Facebook has nearly 2.85 billion active users. WhatsApp has about 800 million. Twitter has about 360 million. So when you are writing a technical document, sometimes there are minimum limits, sometimes there are maximum limits, and what you give out in this restricted amount of, let's say, real estate that you have is extremely important. You only get one first page for your CV, right? In that case, you have to make sure that you are going to utilize it in the best way, where the most important information is caught by the people who are reading. You might have a CV with multiple pages, but sometimes people only read the first page. So you have to make sure that the most important things would be in the first page. Do not worry, we will be talking about CV writings in a subsequent lecture, but think about it. How you organize the information, where you put it, and how much depth you go to is important. The next point is about needless verbs. Look at this meme. It is created by people who think that when you are writing technical writing, the third pool is saying something grammatically wrong, but in a lot of words as well. So they think that doing that automatically makes it technical or important or educated. So that is not true. In fact, in technical writing, what we expect is that you be descriptive enough that it is understandable, but avoid needless words. So it is agreeable that saying I can't might not be acceptable in technical writing, but it is enough to say I cannot. You do not need to use needless words. Further on needless words, let's look at some examples. Students have never done this before. Project is currently underway. Now, if the people have never done this, it automatically implies that it hasn't been done before. If something is underway, we know that it is currently happening. So these excess of words do not carry any important information. So never done and before will be redundant. Mean currently and underway. I think let's look at some examples, some more examples. Already existing. If it is existing, you know that it is already. Never before. I mentioned it earlier. at the present time. When you say, you just can say at present, none at all, which is okay for speaking, but not for technical writing. It's fundamental, period of time, continue to remain, separate entities, currently underway, still persists, mixed together, finally concluded. All the words in parentheses are not needed. The same information is carried if you use only the words that are outside the parentheses. Then we have excess words. Here the information is conveyed by all the words. None of them are redundant. However, you are using too many words than it is needed. So instead of saying something like made arrangements for, you can say arranged, made the decision and be decided, made the measurement of and be measured, perform the development of, could be developed. Try to avoid excess words whenever possible. Let me quote a line from a very popular Dead Point Society, 1989. Avoid using word very, because it's lazy. A man is not very tired. He's exhausted. Don't use very sad. Use morose. When you can give the same meaning, a single word or fewer words, use those fewer words or the single word. Do not waste your time and the reader's time using too many words. And before this presentation gets amok and become too many words, I shall stop here. And we will meet in the next lecture of technical writing.